Welcome to Revelation Unraveled. I'm your host, William Tapley, also known as the third eagle of the apocalypse and the co-prophet of the end times. The topic for today's program is the Olivet Discourse. That is St. Matthew chapters 24 and 25, which have to do with the end times, where the apostles ask Jesus, "What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the world?" It's important to note that these two questions are not included in St. Luke's or St. Mark's version of the Olivet Discourse. That's because the Olivet Discourse in St. Luke and St. Mark refer to the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD by the Roman general Titus. The Olivet Discourse in St. Matthew, however, refers to the end times and the second and third comings of our Lord Jesus Christ. Now let's briefly review the three basic rules of end times hermeneutics, that is, the interpretation of apocalyptic literature. In interpreting apocalyptic literature, you must remember that, number one, the symbolic interpretation takes precedence over the literal meaning of the passage. Number two, numerology is extremely important. And number three, you need a co-prophet to understand the interpretation of the future. Now, other Bible scholars have no difficulty in understanding Mark and Luke's version of the Olivet Discourse because those prophecies have already occurred. The difficulty comes when they try to interpret the future as described in St. Matthew's version of the Olivet Discourse. Now we should realize that two different interpretations for the same prophecy is not unusual in the Bible. For example, in Daniel, when the four beasts come up out of the sea, in Daniel's own time, those beasts symbolized Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. And the last beast, which was Rome, overtook the first three beasts. In the end times, however, those first three beasts, the lion symbolizes England, the bear symbolizes Russia, and the leopard symbolizes the United States. The fourth beast, which overcomes the first three, is the one world communist tyranny, the New World Order. Another example can be found in Daniel's vision of the ram and the goat. In Daniel's time, the two horns on the ram symbolized the Medes and the Persians, and the goat which defeated them symbolized Greece and Alexander the Great. In our own times, however, the two horns on the ram symbolize England and America, and the single horn on the goat symbolizes the Soviet Union, which will crush the two horns on the ram. Now let's take a look at verse 3 from St. Matthew's Olivet Discourse. The apostles ask Jesus, "What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the world?" As I said, those questions are not included in Luke or Mark. Now let's read verses 4 and 5. "And Jesus answered them, 'Take heed that no man deceive you. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and they shall deceive many.'" Now this deception, which Jesus is talking about, coincides exactly with the first horse in the book of Revelation, and that is the white horse of apostasy. In fact, we will see that the Olivet Discourse follows exactly all four horses in the book of Revelation. Now this great apostasy, which Jesus is talking about, began with the breakup of Christianity and the fall of the great star in the book of Revelation, also known as Martin Luther. Martin Luther is a precursor of the false prophet, just as Henry VIII is a precursor of the Antichrist. The next two verses reflect the red horse of war. "And you shall hear of wars and rumors of war. See that you be not troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet." The culmination of all these wars will be World War III. And Jesus continues, For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. Now the second half of verse 7 reflects the ride of the third horse, which is the black horse of famine. And there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in divers places. And then Jesus adds, now all these things are the beginnings of sorrows. The word sorrows here refers to the tribulation. Don't listen to the false prophets who say that the beginning of sorrows, that is the beginning of the tribulation, is somehow triggered by a supposed confirmation of a covenant with the Antichrist. Jesus makes it very clear here that the beginning of sorrows, that is the beginning of the tribulation, is triggered by World War III and not by any covenant between the Jews and the Antichrist. Now let's look at the 18 verses in St. Matthew's Olivet Discourse, which are divided up very significantly into a 666 pattern. Now the first of these verses, that is 9 through 14, describe the first half of the Great Tribulation. That is the first 3.5 years before the reign of the Antichrist. Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and you shall be hated by all nations for my name's sake. What will it be like for Christians to live during the tribulation? Remember, Henry VIII is a precursor of the Antichrist. And under the reign of Henry VIII, Catholic priests, for example, were hunted down and executed for their religious faith. With Adolf Hitler, Jews were executed for their religious faith. It will be the same for Christians living in the tribulation. If you want to know what it will be like, pretend you are a Jew living under Adolf Hitler, or pretend that you are a Catholic priest living under Henry VIII. Your lives will be worthless. Verse number 10. And then shall many be scandalized, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another. Living during the tribulation will also be the same as living under communism. After the Bolshevik Revolution, the Russian people were afflicted by communist tyranny, the same as Christians will be under the one world communist tyranny. And Jesus continues, and many false prophets shall arise and deceive many, and because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall grow cold. Even your friends and relatives will turn you in to the one world communist authorities. And the next verse, but he that shall persevere to the end shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world, for a witness to all nations, and then shall come the end. And the end in this passage refers to the end of the first half of the Great Tribulation. In the next 12 verses of this 666 sequence, we will see the beginning of the second half of the Great Tribulation. Now the next 6 verses of this 666 sequence describe the beginning of the second half of the Great Tribulation, which is marked by the appearance of the abomination of desolation. When therefore you shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let him who reads understand. The abomination of desolation will be the prohibition of the Lord's Supper by the Antichrist from all Christian churches throughout the world. Now that's all we have time for on part 1. On part 2, we will continue looking at the 18 tribulation verses, which are divided into a 666 pattern, and the 15 victory verses, which immediately follow, and are divided into a 555 pattern. Remember, 555 is the number which defeats the evil number 666. That's because 555 symbolizes Mary's rosary. Now, if you would like more information, simply write to the address you see on your screen.